Imagine boarding an ordinary commercial ferry in the northern Philippines. Families are waiting to travel between islands. Trucks are parked on the loading deck. Workers move cargo onto the ship. At first glance, it looks like just another day in one of the world's largest archipelagos. But hidden among the vehicles are American anti-ship missiles capable of sinking modern warships more than 180 kilometers away. This is not a scene from a war movie. It happened in June 2026. During the 10th iteration of the U.S.-Philippines KAMANDAG military exercises, U.S. Marines loaded their newest anti-ship missile systems and air defense vehicles onto contracted Philippine commercial ferries and transported them across the islands of the Luzon Strait, one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. At first glance, the exercise appears almost mundane. Why would the world's most powerful military rely on civilian ferries to move some of its most advanced weapons? But that question reveals something much bigger. This was not a logistical experiment. It was a glimpse into how the United States plans to fight, and perhaps deter, a future conflict with China. The missile system transported during the exercise was the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, or NMESIS. Armed with naval strike missiles capable of striking targets more than 100 nautical miles away, these launchers are designed to hunt warships, disappear, relocate, and strike again. Accompanying them were Marine air defense systems tasked with protecting these missile units from aircraft and drones. Together, they represent a fundamental shift in American military thinking. For decades, military power in the Pacific depended on massive aircraft carriers, large military bases, and centralized logistics networks. Today, the Pentagon is preparing for a very different kind of war. A war fought across hundreds of islands. A war where civilian infrastructure becomes strategic infrastructure. And a war where an ordinary ferry carrying ordinary passengers may also be carrying some of America's most important weapons. To understand why this exercise matters, we first need to understand what actually happened in the waters north of the Philippines. On June 15, 2026, more than 2,000 military personnel from the Philippines, the United States, Japan, and South Korea launched the 10th iteration of Exercise KAMANDAG, one of the largest and most important military exercises in the Philippine archipelago. But unlike earlier versions of KAMANDAG, this year's exercise was not primarily about amphibious landings or conventional military drills. It was about preparing for a conflict across islands.
Throughout this exercise, we have demonstrated that while our flags may be different, our purpose is one. We stand united by our shared values, our enduring commitment to peace, and our collective resolve to defend the freedom and security that our peoples deserve.
The exercise stretched across northern Luzon, the Babuyan Islands, Batanes, and Calayan Island, a chain of islands located between the Philippines and Taiwan, directly astride one of the world's most important maritime choke points, the Luzon Strait. And this is where things became truly significant. Using contracted Philippine commercial ferries and roll-on, roll-off civilian vessels, U.S. Marines from the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment transported two of America's newest battlefield systems across these islands. The first was the Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System, or NMESIS. At first glance, NMESIS does not look particularly impressive. It is essentially an unmanned missile launcher mounted on a modified tactical vehicle. But appearances can be deceiving. Each launcher carries naval strike missiles capable of hitting targets more than 100 nautical miles, or approximately 185 kilometers away. A single Marine Littoral Regiment will eventually field 18 MESIS launchers, organized into 6 independent firing sections, allowing them to disperse across multiple islands while remaining connected as a single combat network. Accompanying in MESIS was the Marine Air Defense Integrated System, or MADIS, designed to protect these missile units from drones, helicopters, aircraft, and cruise missiles. But perhaps the most revealing statement came not from a general, but from a marine logistics officer. As Major Robert Moore explained, the modern littoral environment requires us to rapidly move our forces across challenging maritime terrain. That sentence may be one of the most important descriptions of America's new Pacific strategy, because what the Marines were practicing was not simply transportation. They were rehearsing how to turn an entire archipelago into a battlefield. At this point, you might be asking a simple question. Why would the United States military, the most powerful military in human history, transport anti-ship missiles on civilian ferries? The answer is simple. Because the old way of fighting in the Pacific may no longer work. For decades, American military power depended on a familiar formula: massive aircraft carriers, large amphibious ships, enormous overseas bases, and centralized logistics networks. The assumption was straightforward: if you possessed enough firepower and enough ships, you could dominate the battlefield. But the rise of China's military has forced the Pentagon to rethink that assumption. Today, China operates the world's largest navy by number of vessels, fields thousands of long-range missiles, and maintains one of the most sophisticated surveillance networks ever built. Large warships can be tracked, fixed bases can be targeted, massive logistics hubs can be destroyed. And that changes everything. So instead of concentrating forces, the United States is now trying to disperse them. Instead of relying solely on military infrastructure, it is increasingly integrating civilian infrastructure. And instead of hiding military movements through secrecy, it is trying to hide them through normality. Think about it from China's perspective. A US aircraft carrier is impossible to miss. A destroyer can be tracked. A military transport ship attracts immediate attention. But how do you identify a missile launcher hidden among thousands of civilian trucks, boarding hundreds of commercial ferries, operating across more than 7,600 islands of the Philippine archipelago? That is precisely the challenge the Pentagon wants China to face. As Major Robert Moore of the 3rd Marine Littoral Regiment explained, the modern littoral environment requires us to rapidly move our forces across challenging maritime terrain.
76833.
76833.
60446.
60446.
In other words, the United States may have discovered that in the age of satellites, drones, and artificial intelligence, the best way to hide military movements is not to make them invisible. It is to make them look ordinary. To understand why US Marines are practicing missile deployments on remote Philippine islands, we need to do something deceptively simple. We need to look at a map. Start in southern Japan. Move south through Okinawa. Then Taiwan. Then the Batanes Islands. Then the Babuyan Islands. And finally, northern Luzon. Together, these islands form what military planners have called for decades the first island chain. A natural barrier stretching from Japan to the Philippines that separates China's coastline from the wider Pacific Ocean. For China, this geography presents a strategic dilemma. Much of China's maritime trade, energy imports, and naval access to the Pacific must pass through choke points connected to this island chain. Any Chinese naval force attempting to move into the Western Pacific must navigate through a relatively small number of straits and maritime corridors. And that is precisely what makes these islands so important. The waters between Taiwan and the Philippines, particularly the Luzon Strait, are not just shipping lanes. They are gateways. Gateways for Chinese warships, gateways for submarines, and gateways for any future military operation extending beyond China's immediate coastline. This is why the US Marine Corps has begun deploying anti-ship missile systems not only in the Philippines, but also in Okinawa and across other parts of the first island chain. The strategic logic is straightforward. If mobile missile launchers can be dispersed across these islands, they can threaten hostile ships attempting to move through these critical waterways. And that changes the role of the Philippines entirely. The Philippines is no longer simply an American ally. It is becoming something much more consequential, a maneuver space, a logistics network, and potentially a mobile missile archipelago stretching across one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. Now imagine, for a moment, that a crisis erupts in the Taiwan Strait. One American anti-ship missile launcher is hidden somewhere in the Batanes Islands. Another is deployed on Calayan Island. A third is operating from Okinawa. And perhaps several more have been quietly moved to other islands across the northern Philippines. None of them remain in one place for long. They move. They hide. They receive targeting data. They fire. And then they disappear. This is precisely the type of battlefield the U.S. Marine Corps has been rehearsing during exercises like KAMANDAG. In 2025, Marines successfully inserted NMESIS launchers into the Batanes Islands by air, concealed them across key maritime terrain, and simulated maritime strikes against ships transiting the Luzon Strait. In 2026, they went one step further, moving those same missile systems aboard Philippine commercial ferries and civilian roll-on, roll-off vessels. The strategic implications are profound. For decades, naval warfare was built around a simple objective: control the sea. But the Marine Corps' new concept does not seek to control the sea. It seeks to deny it. Military strategists increasingly refer to this approach as archipelagic denial. The idea is deceptively simple. Instead of confronting an adversary's fleet directly, you scatter mobile missile launchers across hundreds of islands, forcing enemy ships to operate under constant threat. For China, this creates an extraordinary problem. How do you locate a missile launcher that can relocate every few hours? How do you search hundreds of islands spread across thousands of square kilometers? How do you distinguish military movements from civilian activity when the launchers themselves are transported aboard ordinary ferries using existing commercial infrastructure? And this may be the most important lesson emerging from the war in Ukraine. The distinction between civilian and military infrastructure is increasingly disappearing. Civilian ports become military logistics hubs. Commercial transportation networks become strategic assets. Ordinary infrastructure becomes part of the battlefield. In many ways, the Pentagon may have reached a remarkable conclusion. In the 21st century, the best way to hide military power is not to conceal it. It is to make it look completely ordinary. For decades, military planners have relied on a simple principle: you cannot destroy what you cannot find. And that is precisely the problem China now faces. Imagine that tensions erupt somewhere along the first island chain. Chinese commanders know that American anti-ship missiles have been deployed throughout the region. But where exactly? Is there a launcher hidden in the Batanes Islands? Another on Calayan? Several more operating from Okinawa? Or perhaps some have already been moved aboard civilian ferries to entirely different locations. The problem is not that these missile systems are powerful. The problem is that they are unpredictable. The Navy Marine Expeditionary Ship Interdiction System was designed for exactly this kind of warfare. The launchers can relocate rapidly, hide among civilian infrastructure, receive targeting data from aircraft, satellites, drones, and naval forces, launch their missiles, and then disappear before an adversary can respond. For China's Navy, this creates a strategic nightmare. To neutralize the threat, Chinese forces would have to search hundreds of islands spread across thousands of square kilometers, while distinguishing military targets from civilian transportation networks and commercial infrastructure. And all of this would have to happen under the constant risk of being targeted themselves. This is why the United States is investing so heavily in distributed missile networks across the first island chain. Because deterrence is not simply about possessing more weapons. Deterrence is about creating uncertainty. And the more uncertainty an adversary faces, the more difficult, costly, and risky any military decision becomes. In that sense, the commercial ferry carrying American missiles across the northern Philippines was never just a ferry. It was a message. For decades, analysts believed technology would overcome geography. But the opposite may be happening. The mountains, islands, straits, fishing ports, ferry terminals, and civilian infrastructure of the Western Pacific are becoming the foundation of a new form of deterrence. The significance of U.S. Marines boarding Philippine commercial ferries is therefore not logistical. It is geopolitical, because the Pentagon may have discovered that the most effective way to defend Taiwan is not through larger fleets or more aircraft carriers. It may be through transforming the entire first island chain into a dispersed, mobile, civilian-supported missile network that China can never fully locate, never fully destroy, and never fully ignore.